Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys swinging by the channel and checking out today's video. We're going to be talking about spring bass fishing. I want to give you guys sort of a good little seminar tutorial on spring fishing and talk about the primary months that I consider what are the spring months, and that's pretty much March and April. At the time of filming this video right now, it's the 1st of March, so it's sort of what I consider the start of it. So got a lot of different changes that happened during the month of March and April in terms of what the fish do and techniques they prefer. So I'm going to sort of talk about some of my favorites today in the video. Also, guys, speaking of spring fishing, I just want to invite everybody before we get started to please check out all the spring sales that Tackle Warehouse is going on right now. I'll put my link in the description. And if you guys can use and bookmark that link for your purchases at Tackle Warehouse, channel gets a little bit of commission on anything you buy, so that's a good way to support the channel. And also, guys, please check out the spring fishing or the spring lake map breakdowns I build for Fish the Moment if you guys want to get some good spots on your favorite lake. So I'll link everything in the description. Really appreciate that. Okay, I think that everybody loves spring fishing. It's like, reason is that the fish are shallower, they're more active, they bite pretty good, and it's just the best time, man. It's just March and April, specifically, later in March and into April, is the best time to fish almost anywhere in the country. And I sort of want to go over some of my favorite techniques because a lot of it's based upon water temperature. Now, depends on where you're at in the country. Like right now in March, water can still be cold. Like right now in Missouri, our water temperature is still in the upper 30s, around 40 degrees. So that's not what I really consider spring fishing, but it doesn't take long to warm up. I mean, weather patterns change. I look for the next couple of weeks to start warming up everywhere across the country, and the fish start reacting to that. So sort of talk about some of my favorite March and April techniques. Now, March is the best time of year to catch big fish. It's like there's no other time of the year that there's more big fish shallow or less than 10 foot of water in the month of March. I mean, that's just the time that they're in there. So there's a lot of different things that work in. So one of the things that I can tell you about fishing in March is this is the time that you want to throw the big lures. Big lures, and normally some type of big slow moving lures. During March, the shad, or most of the shad, in other words, they're at their largest size for the most part, unless some of the late spawners in the summer. So your bait fish are bigger, crawdads are bigger, fish are hungry and they're wanting to feed up, and they go for larger baits. So one of the first pieces of advice I can give you guys for March fishing is go with your big baits because you're after big fish. So some of my favorite March lures are like a big spinner bait, 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce spinner bait, big profile, big trailer on it, like a number 6, number 7 blade. Some type of big spinner bait is one of my favorite March lures to fish. Fishing it around shallow cover, in water less than, 8 or 10 feet deep, throwing it up rocky banks, lay down trees, anything like that. Sometimes just slow rolling it just down bare banks can work really good. Another bait that's really good in the month of March is a chatterbait, especially once that water temperature starts to get about 50 degrees. Chatterbait is an excellent lure to use over shallow grass beds, even on rocky banks. One thing to try, guys, I'll give you a little tip here, is take some type of a crawdad pattern chatterbait and throw it on a boat ramp. If your lake that you have has, those like residential, the small boat ramps, throw that chatterbait up on the bank and just slow roll it, try to keep it close to the bottom down that whole slope of the boat ramp. It's a good way to catch big fish. Another bait that works really good that in March is some type of a lipless crankbait. A red lipless crankbait's a really good bait to throw, like a 1/2 ounce. Same type of deal, just slow rolling it, just on those same type of areas. A lot of times if I'm throwing the lipless crankbait, I like to throw it on a little bit flatter banks sometimes. Those flat banks can work really good with it. But lipless crankbait is another way to catch some really big fish during the month of March. Crawdad pattern crankbait, something like a wigglewort or a rock crawler, fishing along some type of channel banks can be really good. And then finally, one of the things I really like to fish in March is a full-size jig. That is probably the only slow bait that I fish. That, like my Blaukat throwback jig, pitching that jig up on rocky banks and bluffs is a really good way to catch them. Now, most of this stuff in March, we're talking about water temperatures in the upper 40s to mid 50s for the most part. But that's pretty much my repertoire with that. Another thing with that is, and a jerkbait. A jerkbait can be pretty good too, especially if you're fishing a little bit cleaner water and if the lake has a lot of spotted bass. If you have a lake that has a lot of spotted bass in it, a jerkbait can be some of the best, baits to fish during the month of March. Now, there's a transition that takes place once that water temperature starts to get close to 60 degrees. So you're going to notice, like towards the end of March and specifically the first part of April, again, depending upon your weather patterns, that the fish get away from those moving baits. Once April hits and once that water temperature starts to get about 60, the baits like the chatterbait and the spinnerbait and the crankbaits don't work as good because the mood and the personality of the bass changes, and they have spawning on their mind, whether it's a male bass or a female bass. And the spawning personality of a bass, they're looking for areas to bed, they're scouting areas, they're building nests, they're actually bedding, garden fry afterwards. And when those fish are in and around that spawning mode, and that spawning mode can last 2 to 3 weeks sometimes, they want a bottom bait. They don't want to chase a bait. So once that water temperature starts hitting about 60 degrees, that's when I make a change and I go to like a wacky rig and a shaky head. Once the water temperature gets about 60, those are the two best baits you can use for numbers and size of fish. A wacky rig and a shaky head produces lots of fish, and it produces good fish. Most of the time I'm throwing like a 6-inch zoom trick worm on the shaky head and like a 5-inch soft plastic stick bait on my wacky rig. Really, really good ways to catch them there. Another thing that can work really good, if you have a little bit more off-colored water that time of year, is pitching and flipping a soft plastic lure, specifically like a lizard or a brush hog or even a creature bait, on a light slip sinker, like an 1/8 ounce, no heavier than a 3/16. One of the things that you're going to find out about fishing in the springtime of the year when those fish are spawning, they like a slow fall. So I use a shaky head that's got a light head on it, slow fall of a wacky rig, pitching and flipping that Texas rig in more stained water on a light sinker. That's going to get you a lot of bites. That's probably, guys, one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you in spring fishing is go with a slow fall. Whatever the bait you're using, those fish really react to a slow fall a lot better. Now, the only exception to that is if the water's flooded in the bushes where you have to penetrate with a heavier bait. But when I'm just normal fishing in April, I'm using light baits, small stuff like that. Now, once the fish are done spawning, it's still spring, post-spawn. Now, you're talking about mid to late April, early into May, depending upon what part of the country in, they make another transition. And they slowly start to get off those more finessey bottom baits, and they go back to the reaction lures, but a different category. Probably my two favorite lures to fish, or actually three, once those fish get done spawning, is a floating worm and a fluke. Covering water in those same type of areas where those fish have been bedding with a floating worm and a fluke, those fish really like to come up on a bait in the post-spawn more. So those baits that are high in the water column, that are moving through, just a few inches under the surface, that's why the fluke and the floating worm are really good. Another thing's a good one is a topwater bait. A walking topwater, like a Zara Spook's, really good after they spawn. Those are probably three of my favorite ones. If the water's a little bit stained, swim jig can be really good. So that's sort of the transition that takes place along there. And every lake's different. You're not gonna, this is, what I'm talking about does not fit every single lake in the country, but you can usually apply it to most lakes that are man-made. Now, the exceptions to the rule would be like if you're fishing grass lakes or fishing way down south, like in Texas and Louisiana and Florida. That's sort of a different situation. But for most of the people across the country, that's going to be pretty much the things that are working. But anyway, like I said, probably the biggest piece of advice, guys, if I can give you advice on spring fishing, when the water's below 60, throw those big, slow-moving baits like your spinner baits and your chatter baits and crank baits. And then once you hit that 60-degree water, go to the finessey stuff on the bottom, like the shaky head and the wacky rig. So anyway, guys, hope it helps you guys catch some fish this spring. We'll check in later. See you.